While Jonathan Harker waltzed into the jaws of death in Transylvania, life went on as usual back home in England. It's now time for us to meet some more key players in this epic story. Just like with Jonathan, we'll learn about them through letters, journal entries, and other first-hand accounts. The first is Miss Mina Murray, Jonathan's fiancée. She's an assistant schoolmistress and keen for her summer holidays to start. This year, she'll be spending them by the sea with her bestie, Lucy Westenra. Mina is a modern young woman who keeps up with all the latest trends and technology. She's currently learning shorthand, or stenography, plus typewriting and journaling. This is partly to help Jonathan with his law practice, but also because she enjoys being a new woman. It's the 1890s, after all. Mina thinks Jonathan will be back home within a week. If only she knew. Then we have Lucy Westenra, Mina's BFF. Lucy's from a rich family, so she doesn't need to work like Mina does. There's also been an exciting development in Lucy's life. A tall, curly-haired man named Mr. Arthur Holmwood is on the scene. He also has a handsome friend, Dr. John Seward, who oversees a large psychiatric hospital. Isn't Count Dracula's new English home next door to an asylum? It must be a coincidence. Speaking of coincidences, a short time later, Lucy receives 3 marriage proposals in one day. But she's not gloating about it. In fact, Lucy's distraught that she had to break the hearts of 2 fine men. The first was Dr. John Seward, who was obviously nervous, but seemed to take the refusal well. The second was Mr. Quincy P. Morris, a charming young man from Texas. He also took Lucy's refusal well, but got a little kiss for his troubles. Finally, Arthur Holmwood, Lucy's real crush, proposed in the afternoon, making a happy end to a dramatic day. What Lucy doesn't know is that Dr. Seward is devastated. He can't even eat the next day. Thankfully, his work at the asylum keeps him busy. In fact, he has an interesting patient he wants to study, 59-year-old R.M. Renfield. To help lift everyone's spirits, Quincy invites Dr. Seward and Arthur over for a boys' night. Since they're all old friends, Quincy wants the 3 of them to make a toast to Arthur and Lucy's engagement. That Quincy has the heart of a lion. Soon enough, the girls have their own get-together. It's the end of July and Mina has travelled to Whitby to stay at Lucy's house. It's a great spot for a holiday, with sweeping views of the town, Old Whitby Abbey, the Esk River, and the dramatic Yorkshire coastline. Mina soon finds her favourite spot to sit, the enormous graveyard of the local church. It's perched so close to the cliffs that some of the old graves have fallen into the sea. There are also 3 old men who come there every day to sit and talk. Maybe they can tell Mina more about the local legends and ghost stories. Soon enough, one of the old fellows hobbles over for a chat. But when Mina asks him about the legends, he blasts them all as lies. The next day, Mina gets another earful from Mr. Swales, the sceptical old sailor. All this talk of ghosts and superstitions has annoyed him for decades, not to mention all the lies written on the gravestones. The old sailor knew many of the men buried here, along with their fathers and grandfathers. Most of them drowned, so the graves are empty. Mr. Swales and his cronies think it's hilarious, but Lucy and Mina certainly don't. Mina is especially out of sorts. She's worried about Jonathan. His business trip to Transylvania seems to be dragging on. Back at the psychiatric hospital, Dr. Seward has been busy with Renfield. His focused method of feeding flies to spiders, which he then feeds to sparrows, is interesting. Renfield keeps a detailed record of his pets and snacks on the juiciest ones. When he begs Dr. Seward to get him a kitten, Dr. Seward draws the line. This refusal triggers a flash of homicidal rage in Renfield, and he eats all his sparrows. Gross. Dr. Seward diagnoses Renfield as a zoophagous, or life-eating maniac. He wants to absorb as many lives as possible. From insects to birds to mammals, what would have been his next steps? Back in Whitby, Mina is starting to freak out. There's been very little news from Jonathan, and Lucy's sleepwalking habit is making Mina nervous. She needs to lock their bedroom door every night to stop Lucy from wandering out onto the cliffs. By August, Lucy's sleepwalking worsens, and a mighty storm gathers off the coast. But at least old Mr. Swales has calmed down. One day, he apologises to Mina for the jokes he made about the dead. He has a habit of leaning into dark humour because it makes death less scary. But he can feel it coming for him now, even on the wind. Something is coming. That night, a violent storm pummels Whitby and a thick fog rolls in from the sea. All the fishing boats race into the safety of the harbour, but a mysterious ship remains out on the waves. The spectators on the shoreline brace for its destruction. When the ship sails miraculously into the harbour, the spectators' relief turns to horror. There's a corpse tied to the helm. As the vessel lands on the sandy shore, a huge dog leaps from the bow and disappears into the misty darkness. When officials board the ship, they determine that the dead man had tied his own hands to the wheel. Interestingly, among the ropes and torn flesh on his wrists is a crucifix. The ship, named the Demeter, is found to be carrying boxes full of soil. This cargo is collected by a local lawyer to whom it had been consigned. How can a ship steered by a dead man manage to pull into its designated port, and in the middle of a raging storm? Then there's the giant dog that leapt from the ship. When a much-loved local mastiff is found dead, the townsfolk grow worried. Judging by its wounds, it had a savage opponent. As for the dead helmsman, the ship's log tells a shocking tale. The Demeter set sail from Varna, Russia, with a crew of 9. Within a fortnight, the captain noticed his crew becoming agitated and frightened. Then the men started disappearing, and some reported seeing a tall, thin man on board the ship. Eventually, the captain was the last man left. One evening, he saw the monster on deck and finally understood what had happened to his crew. So he tied his hands and a crucifix to the wheel and steered until he died. At the inquest, the verdict remains open. There just isn't enough evidence to corroborate the captain's account. Regardless, the people of Whitby decide he's a hero and that he should be given a public funeral. The giant dog remains a mystery. Lucy and Mina attend the captain's funeral, but Lucy seems very agitated. Perhaps she's just a sensitive soul. Or maybe it's because old Mr. Swales was found dead that morning. He was sitting in their usual seat in the graveyard, but his neck was broken, and he had a look of terror on his face. Had he seen death, like he'd predicted? On the night of the next full moon, Mina wakes to find Lucy gone from their room. After a quick and fruitless search of the house, Mina runs outside and heads for the graveyard. There, reclining in their favourite seat, is Lucy. But who is that dark figure standing over her? Mina gets a quick glance at a white face and red eyes before it disappears. She finds Lucy still asleep and gasping for air. Mina pins a shawl around her, wakes her gently, and walks her back home. But Mina thinks she must have been careless with the pin. There's a small wound on Lucy's throat. To keep Lucy safe, Mina ties the key to their bedroom door around her wrist. But this doesn't stop Lucy from repeatedly trying to escape while sleepwalking, which happens most nights. One night, Lucy points to a big bat circling outside their window. At sunset the next day, the two women see a dark figure sitting on their favourite seat in the graveyard. Are his eyes red? Or is that just a trick of the light? A few hours later, while Mina is taking a stroll, she sees Lucy at their windowsill. She's fast asleep, and perched next to her is something that looks like a giant bird. When Mina races up to put Lucy to bed, she notices how pale and exhausted she looks. Mina decides not to tell Lucy's mother about any of this. The old lady is fragile as it is, and the shock would kill her. Lucy continues to fade, and Mina often finds her asleep at the open window. She is faint, struggling to breathe, and the wound on her neck isn't healing at all. Mina thinks it might be time to call a doctor. A few days later, the 50 boxes of soil carried on the Demeter are delivered to Carfax Abbey. Thanks to ignorant lawyers and lax quarantine laws, Count Dracula is safely installed in his new home. Meanwhile, Mina finally gets word from Jonathan. He's been very ill and is being cared for by nuns in a hospital in Budapest. Mina will travel to Hungary to be by his side and marry him there and then. But she must be careful. The nun, Sister Agatha, warns Mina that Jonathan has had a terrible shock. During the last 6 weeks under the nun's care, he's said some frightening things about wolves, poison, blood, and ghosts. When she arrives, Mina mustn't let him get worked up about these things, or he may not recover. Speaking of getting worked up, Renfield is being weirder than ever. One night, Dr. Seward finds himself sniffing around like a dog and saying something about the master. Then, at 2 a.m, he escapes his cell. Dr. Seward and the orderlies track him down to nearby Carfax Abbey, where he's pressed himself against the chapel door. Dr. Seward hears Renfield pleading with his master to reward him for being a good slave. When Dr. Seward and the orderlies close in, Renfield fights like a raging tiger. They finally haul him back to the asylum and take extra security measures. Renfield is put in a straitjacket and locked in a padded cell. Will this be enough to stop him? So, it appears that the Count's presence in England is already being deeply felt. Jonathan knows the truth, but he's so ill and far away. Will someone step in to fight back before it's too late? We hope you enjoyed this Schooling Online production. For more easy lessons, check out our other videos.